How far would you go for revenge? Now, I know in our everyday life and our normal human existence, you may often get slighted, insulted, feel like you've been rubbed the wrong way. And oftentimes a human reaction is one of seeking payback, seeking justice.
Ahora vas a conocer a Dios.
The film Sicario, debuting in 2015, answers that question. It's arguably one of my favorite movies. It is a banger. I enjoy it thoroughly, and today on Administrative Results, we're gonna dive on in.
Welcome to Juarez.
Now, of course, you may be wondering,
Hey Admin, why are we talking about Sicario?
well, it's my channel, I can do whatever I want, and there are no rules, and I also love movies that have a good bit of gunplay. And they all fit to a perfect culmination here on the channel because I like dissecting characters from those movies as well. We, of course, have to lay some groundwork for the film before we even get to the movie, and then, of course, we will dissect some of the characters, gear, and guns that go into the movie that make it so enjoyable, and I am freaking stoked. I'm pretty excited for this one. I love the movie.
What did you think of those movies? Oh, horrible.
I know, I'm a big simp for Sicario. There's a few things I don't like, but overall, damn did that movie come out of nowhere, and damn was it freaking awesome. So gentlemen, without further ado, let's get to it. Sorry, I just came back from a border mission convoy where we took out a car full of guys that weren't subscribed to the channel, so make sure you do that. I really do appreciate it, and it does mean a lot because you can stay in tune with what's going on here on the channel. YouTube typically doesn't like what we do here, so sometimes you may get unsubscribed, so make sure you check that you are still a current subscriber. Now, 2015 was actually a pretty banger year for movies, and to make you guys feel old, 2015 is almost 10 years ago. Isn't that crazy? It feels like yesterday. Ah, jeez. So, I mean, in 2015, banger year for movies. We had Mad Max Fury Road, we had Jurassic Park, Star Wars The Force Awakens, honestly that was kind of dog shit, and then we had Spectre, they had Avengers Age of Ultron. Now these were all some very heavy hitter movies, but one movie that came out in particular that really stuck out, especially to the gun guy world, was Sicario, which debuted in 2015 with a budget of $30 million. It would go on to perform at a pretty impressive north of $80 million mark in the worldwide box office. I'm semi a businessman with this channel, but I will say that if I can get an ROI of that investment off that small of a budget, I would be pretty happy. And I think the movie did pretty good because they would go on to make a sequel, Sicario 2. I also enjoyed that movie. Go figure. I realize I'm a big Hollywood nerd. I hate Hollywood, it's really weird. Now, to better understand Sicario, we have to understand the real world a little bit, and to understand the real world, which I still don't understand sometimes, we have to understand the drug cartels. It's no secret that the United States has always had a substance abuse problem.
This is crack cocaine.
Should I put a content warning? We're gonna be talking about drugs and like murders. Content warning, mature adult content. Wait, no, is that the wrong type of adult content? So to better understand Sicario, we have to better understand the world that Sicario takes place in, and that is the world of the Mexican drug cartel. So America's always been a nation that has been a massive consumer. It's literally just what we get told all the time. Consume, consume, consume. Even in this video, I'm gonna tell you to consume and add product placement. You can never really escape it. It's one of those things where it's just always happening. Consuming drugs is no different. It's one of the things that Americans love to do, i.e. blowing stuff up the nose, smoking it, or injecting it with a needle. Americans can't get enough of it, and it kind of does hit close to home for a lot of us. Now, in the more recent years, we've had the rise of fentanyl. Now, I was a beat cop for 2 years, and fentanyl was a big concern. There were these things going around, they were called M30 pills. They'd often be confused with fentanyl, or they'd have similar effects, and you would even see people, when you're high on them, dealing with them, like they'd just be completely passed out, and it was kind of surreal, and so you just Narcan them and they'd come back to life. So as someone that's even participated in the war on drugs, I was actually also really excited to go over this video. So essentially, the speed run is drug cartels form due to the supply and demand of the American market. We go back to opium. Opium was a popular product even before Prohibition. Now, I believe what happened is that the Chinese,
I like China,
came over and they wanted to immigrate to the United States. The United States was like, we're tired of having all these Chinese immigrators.
you boys like Mexico!
Mexico was their next best option, and with that, they brought a lot of opium with them, and that's how you would get a lot of the opium trade started in Mexico. Mexico, funny enough, has a very great growing condition for a lot of crops. Weed, opium, all that good stuff. And with them bordering the United States with a very massive border, it makes it a brilliant idea for smuggling operations. Now, of course, we'd fast forward to Prohibition, where we get tequila runners, which would be establishing the routes for future drug cartels to use when it came to smuggling the more hardcore stuff across the border. So with a cartel, they are business enterprises, and they tend to weave multiple webs and have their tentacles in multiple operations. You know, you gotta think human trafficking, prostitution, smuggling, gun running. If there's a way to make money off it and it's illegal, the cartel is gonna do it. And they are pretty good businesses, except the stakes are much higher, or if you mess up at that job, you may just get melted and turned into human soup, as opposed to just being fired by Karen at HR. So now if we fast forward to more the Vietnam era, this is where things start to lay the groundwork for the more modern cartel that we see today. There was some things going on during the Vietnam era. Well, one of them being the Vietnam War. But there was a counterculture movement known as the hippies, and they were consuming a lot of marijuana. And that would lead to the rise of demand for marijuana, and Mexico would become one of the suppliers. Now, what also happened is a massive war on drugs was starting to take form, and they would crack down on a lot of American growers, there would be a lot of crackdown within the United States, and so that left Mexico open to kind of take the market as far as marijuana distribution in the Americas. Now, another thing that would take place within the coming years would be the Medellin cartel, headed by Pablo Escobar. Now, the Medellin cartel would, at the height of its power, be making $60 million a day. Now, if that's going off of that 1980s money, you essentially double it, and they're making like $120 million a day. They'd be a multi-billion-dollar organization. But eventually the Medellin cartel will be taken down, the pieces removed, and Pablo Escobar, I believe, got yeeted off a roof by a marksman from their police force. And that would open up the door for the Cali cartel to take over. And the Cali cartel ran it much more like a business as opposed to how Pablo Escobar did it. And they would be the very prominent family running the cartel in Colombia for a bit. So around this time, there's about two things going on. There's the Colombian cartels, and then there's like the Mexican cartels. And to me, they're the more notorious cartels. They're the more known factions. And the Sinaloa cartel will be the one that takes shape in Mexico, along with the Los Zetas and the Gulf cartel in the 90s to 2000s. Now, the Los Zetas are probably the scarier faction because it's kind of the first time that a lot of former soldiers and elite soldiers were joining the cartel, and their tactics were very brutal. And this really stepped up the violence game for the cartels. We really start to see in the modern, like the 90s to 2000s, even today, we start to see a much more refined cartel where a lot of these guys have so much money and so much resources. There's even a video of what was confirmed to be a Mexican drug cartel just rolling down in Phoenix, Arizona. They like had a Barrett 50 in the front passenger seat. I mean, it's pretty gnarly to think like, hey, these guys got firepower, they're well connected, they're well funded, they got some good stuff. They're about that life. They are about that life. At the drop of the hat, they're gonna rock and roll, or else they're probably gonna get melted into soup, people soup. It's a theme going on here, people soup county. So that takes us up to Sicario, because Sicario dives into the brutality of the cartels, how well funded, how well connected, and just how brutal they are willing to be. And the first Sicario starts off in Chandler, Arizona. The problem is that is definitely not Chandler, Arizona. My guess is they filmed that in New Mexico because there's no saguaro. I will say there's an interesting thing going on where they're like deploying a SWAT team on the hill in the background, and they have like a sniper overwatch, and then they're all like in black. I will say it's kind of weird they went with the all black look knowing that they're gonna be in the desert, because I just know like seeing SWAT teams when I was a cop, a lot of times guys would run OD green and multicam. Like if you're trying to be sneaky out in the desert, surrounding a house. Now, I did see other guys critique how close the sniper was on Overwatch, but to be fair, law enforcement snipers, they usually operate pretty close up. Like they'll be within 200 meters, 200 yards, and their job is a very pinpoint precision shot if they need to take one. So that's a little bit unfair criticism. And that sniper, I think, is pretty well placed in that shot. But essentially, scene starts out, they do the hostage raid. They find no hostages except they're tied up in the wall. That kind of sets the tone for how brutal that the movie is gonna be. And then a explosive device goes off in the shed when they finally do clear the house and are looking for all the evidence and just going through it. That would essentially be the catalyst for what would come in the movie. So the movie is essentially told through the lens of Kate Macer and her perspective of it. And to be honest, throughout the film, Kate Macer just can't hang, and we find out why she was even used in the first place, but we'll get to that in a second. Don't rush me, pal. Kate is essentially going through that event, bomb goes off, she goes to the FBI headquarters where she meets Matt Graver. Now, there are three characters in this movie franchise that are the bee's knees. The cat's pajamas, the silk stockings. Is that a right phrase for it? The silk stockings? Anyway, they're the ones that make the franchise so freaking interesting, and Matt Graver is one of them. Arguably, I think he's the least interesting, but he is one of the pieces of the puzzle that make the movie so much fun. And Matt Graver is the one that needs Kate to operate on U.S. soil.
Got a little nutty, huh?
Nutty, yeah. Yeah, that was fucking illegal. You want to start a war?
You're a fucking spook.
Throughout the movie, we find out that Matt Graver is actually CIA, and the CIA needs a domestic agency to operate within the American borders.
Because CIA can't operate within U.S. borders without a domestic agency attached.
I'm pretty sure the CIA has operated within US borders without the need of the FBI. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, if they wanted to rock and roll, they would just be like, all right, we're going. Oh, we need an FBI nerd? All right, let's get the FBI nerd lady, come in here. Okay, yeah, we got FBI nerd. No, they don't need that. Dude, this is CIA. Anyway, we get our first glimpse of Matt Graver. Now, what I love about Matt Graver so much is in that government setting, what people don't realize is there's so much bureaucracy, so much politicking, so much showmanship that goes on. Your reputation is everything. How you present yourself to the world is very important. You want to make sure you're squared away, wearing the right uniform at the right time, even like the law enforcement setting for those FBI guys. And the FBI has, I'm assuming, a very big culture of that, of how they present themselves. Matt Graver's in that freaking meeting in flip-flops, dude. I love that vibe. It's everything I love because, like, I'm watching this and I'm thinking those guys, those FBI nerds, are probably wishing they could be as coolly dressed as Matt Graver, but they're not a CIA spook, so they can't get away with it. Like, they'd get fired. It's really hard to get fired from a government job. So there is that. Essentially in the meeting, all the big wigs are talking and they're deciding between Kate Macer and her buddy. And essentially they're like, well, Kate's probably the better one for the job because her buddy's a little bit too clean cut, West Point, follow the rules.
No lawyers on this train. Just give me the girl.
Kate might be more like with going against the rules, which we find out in the movie. She's honestly not that great at it.
Wait.
Get out of the car.
She's not great, like not working outside the rules. But anyway, she gets chosen for the job. We fast forward, we go to the Luke Air Force Base where she's hopping on a plane with Matt Graver, and then we get to meet for the first time Alejandro Gillick.
My bird dog over there, Alejandro.
Now, Alejandro Gillick arguably is the most interesting character in the movie. And I really toss it up between Steve Forsing, who we'll get to meet here once the plane lands in Texas, and Alejandro Gillick. I think Alejandro Gillick takes the lead because he has a much bigger why that we find out later in the movie. And there's a little bit hints to it, even when we're on the plane, he's having a flashback and Kate's just like, what's going on? These guys are just napping and we're going on a private jet. Like, she's just being thrust into a world that she has no idea. I will say, when I watched this movie back, and as someone that was just a lowly beat cop, that lifestyle looks way cooler than what Kate Macer would have been used to. Going around on a private jet with a CIA spook and a CIA trained assassin, which we would come out to find later.
Is he CIA? Or you?
He's a DOD advisor just like me.
No, he's not.
Like, that lifestyle sounds way cooler than what Kate Macer's used to. Kate Macer is an FBI nerd. So Kate Macer getting to escape the freaking matrix of boring law enforcement work. Right, I know she's on a SWAT team and she got into a shooting, but as far as like, dude, you're rolling around in a private jet with CIA assassins, like, count your blessings. And she really does not seem grateful throughout the entire movie, okay? Like, a lot of guys would be pretty jazzed to get that role. And she is just like, what are we doing here?
What the fuck are we doing?
Oh no, what are the rules?
Okay, what would you like done here?
I want to follow some semblance of procedure.
Really annoying throughout the entire movie, if I'm being honest, and it kind of gets under my skin. Anyway, plane lands, we meet Steve Forsing, who I am dressed like right now, but with better gear. Steve Forsing is a freaking vibe. Gun culture saw Steve, and they're like, take it. Take my card, I want everything to do with that. They were about it, dude. And to be fair, he is a vibe. Now, Steve Forsing with a very simple look, right? Got the picnic table shirt, got the glasses all thick with a mustache. He looks like a nerd. Fun fact, he's based off a real life person. That real life person being Mike Vining. Mike Vining, the Delta operator, has also been a character that we in gun culture really like. So in gun culture, there's typically like a persona of what a high-speed operator is. And that persona is like long, unkept hair, a beard, tattoos, jacked, probably on TRT or test or steroids of some capacity.
Notably, you can see the outline of his pecs, the separation in his abs.
Mike Vining is none of that. That dude looks like he is a clerk of some kind, an accountant of some kind, but that MFer, that dude is deadly. That guy has probably killed more people than Ebola. Fun, interesting fact about Mike Vining we're gonna dive into real quick. He was in high school when the Tet Offensive kicked off and he would join the Army the same year in 1968. Vining would complete Army EOD training and been sent to Vietnam in 1970. Now in 1978, Mike Vining would join Delta Force, and Delta Force has a very excellent reputation as scary, scary dudes. You would not want some Delta boy showing up to take your lunch. That's a very bad start to your day. And Mike Vining would go on to be part of some very interesting operations such as Operation Eagle Claw. Is a really cool picture of him getting off the plane where he's looking like a hippie, but he's got his famous glasses, is looking scary. And essentially it was a failed operation at the time under President Jimmy Carter. 52 embassy staff were being held hostage at the American Embassy in Tehran of April of 1980. Mike Vining would also be involved with Urgent Fury, which was the invasion of Grenada. And then from 1985 to 1986, Mike Vining would go and join the 176th Ordnance Detachment in the regular Big Army. Now, I'm assuming this is that he wanted to bump up his enlistment ranking, and then he would go back and join Delta, which he did in 1986 to 1992, and he took part in the Gulf War. Mike Vining would then retire from the Army in 1999, and he's still around kicking it today, doing probably retired guy things, right? So that's a pretty long service length, and I think the vibe and aesthetic definitely inspired Steve Forsing. Okay, that's all I want to talk about. Video's over. This unassuming character, this guy that you wouldn't expect to be able to rock and roll at the drop of a hat with this, unintimidating appearance. I mean, they even contrast it in the movie when they go to their briefing where he's in there chilling with the other Delta operators that got back from Afghanistan.
Good. Now, Delta, if you can identify yourself so everyone knows who to hide behind if shit hits the fan.
And this brings me to arguably my least favorite part of the movie and of the franchise is how bad the tactical gear is for a movie of this budget. I mean, their outfit, their style, they look so bad. It really does take me out of the movie. Their drip is just not there. Unlike some of your guys' drip, where you do actually look pretty good. And we have a series here called Rip My Drip, so if you're not subscribed, you should stick around to watch that because maybe we'll have to bring back another episode soon. Not only is the tactical gear, but the look, the vibe, the aesthetic is pretty terrible for the Delta operators and for the gear in general. So I will say on a positive note, their movement and how they function and how they handle firearms, A1. I think they did an excellent job. Very good. There's a few details that are kind of not great that we'll get to in a bit, but it has to do with Steve Forsing's character. But overall, I will say that I think the movement looked really good. Now the gear in general, terrible. And it does bug me because like there's pictures and reference photos of what Delta guys were wearing in 2015. And it's not what they were wearing. I think they even had like an Alice looking belt on for like their duty belt with drop leg holsters, boots that were bloused, these cheap knockoff plate carriers. Like they do not look like what a Delta operator should look like. Even like how some of them are shaped, they're a little too thick in my opinion. Listen, I'm not a Delta operator. Clearly I'm not a Delta operator. I'm a YouTube nerd. But I'm gonna take a shot in the dark that being a little bit thicker as a Delta boy may not be allowed, okay? Like, you're probably gonna get hazed out of that unit.
If you're not fit, you're gonna die.
Hit the gym, work out. Even their gun choices don't look like what I would expect them to be running. I think at that point in that era, they were running like 416s. I could be wrong it again, but I think of like the same timeline, like Sergeant Major Thomas Paine, who we did a video on his 416, and it was just not matching that aesthetic whatsoever. And it makes me mad because it would have just added that much more factor when watching the movie, because the movie is such a good experience. There's a lot of competent actions happening. You have these high-speed operators executing these very dangerous actions in front of all these people, especially on that convoy back across the Mexican bridge. That scene is voila. But like it kind of takes me out of it when I watch it now. And I'm sorry to ruin it for you if you do, but like the gear they're wearing, it's just so bad. How do you look past that? And I really do like have this suspension of disbelief, but it's like so bad to the point where it's not even realistic. You literally can get decent looking plate carriers and rifle setups super easy. It really took me out of it. It just really bugs me because they just don't look their best. You want to know who will help you make you look your best? This video is sponsored Americana Pipedream Apparel. Guys, I love Americana Pipedream Apparel. They're fantastic young Zoomers getting after in the military space and arena, and they can equip you with the proper tools to be dripping down to the nines, Gucci to the socks like a Biggie Papa. Night vision, knives, manuals, all the stuff you will need to fill out that closet to look like a true dripster. Big thank you to Americana Pipedream Apparel. Link for them in the description down below. So I know I've been harping on the Delta drip a lot. And I know that can be kind of annoying. Like, we gotta move on with the plot. So essentially why they were in Juarez to begin with. So their plan was to drastically overreact, and they needed to stir the pot with the cartel politics, and removing a powerful figure from that pot is gonna send a lot of pieces in motion to start a power jockeying effect.
What you're doing here is you're giving us the opportunity to shake the tree and create chaos. That's what this is.
They essentially, with a task force, would go into Mexico, grab one of the cartel leaders, and then they would come back. And then that night, you would see a lot of fighting happening in Juarez across the border. This was to shake the tree. So Kate confronts Matt about what's going on. Essentially, Matt wants to locate one of the cartel Sonora lieutenants operating in the United States who's hidden. And that's going to be Manuel Diaz.
¿Sabes quién soy? Eh?
They want to go over and get Manuel Diaz's brother, Guillermo. I'm assuming Guillermo Diaz. So they go over, grab Diaz with the Texas Rangers and with the Delta Boys in tow, and of course the CIA squad. So they come back while crossing the bridge. They get ambushed by 2 cars full of 4 cartel members.
No! Compas.
Of course, the Delta Boys make light work of those guys, and they hop back in. And I love the line, like, this is gonna be on the front page of every news outlet in America. And it's like,
No, it won't. It won't even make the papers in El Paso.
like, that's a pretty sick vibe. It kind of shows us how crazy the vibe is. Like, imagine you're just some dude chilling on the cross back over from Mexico, and you like just watch a car full of people get obliterated by a bunch of faceless operators. Like, dog, that would be wild. That would be like, you're just sitting there, you're like, oh, whoa, this doesn't look good. Oh my God. Like, that would be watching these dudes get turned into meat pudding, dude. Like, that would be a wild experience. No one's talking about it. Too boring. Not worth the clicks. No one's gonna watch that YouTube video apparently. They end up back with Guillermo. Now, it's hinted that Guillermo was one of the guys that is involved with Alejandro Gillick's family's murder.
You know, I brought an old buddy of yours. I bet you habla to him.
And he's essentially served up on a silver platter to Alejandro Gillick. And they interrogate him, and from that, they find out about the tunnels that the cartels are using for smuggling. Now, this is gonna tie into the plot later. Now, I do love the interrogation scene because it's like, Guillermo's like, no habla inglés, like, I'm not talking. And then Alejandro comes in with a big old bottle of water and just mogs on him. Mogs on his looks maxing, just absolutely chads him. I'm so sorry. But then Matt's like, no habla inglés, dude. Like, I love the vibe of that. Like, even Steve was like, all right, I'm getting out of here. Like, I don't want to be a part of this, and turns the camera off.
I'm gonna step out, Timmy.
Like, there's gonna be some war crimes going on in that room.
Something happens in that room. It's easier to say you didn't see anything.
You know what's crazy to think about? Crazy. That was crazy once. You know what's crazy to think about is interrogating someone. It's fun, like when you watch a movie, right, you absorb it and then you watch it again. And we rewatched the movies again for this, like kind of like taking away a lot of the human aspect and how you would, like, how would I feel in that situation? What would I be thinking in this? Like, that's like a little bit of what we were doing. And man, if I think with that context, I would be feeling pretty down for some Geneva violations. Put it that way. Now, through all of this, we do find out what the goal was. Now, the goal was to flush out the Sonora Lieutenant Manuel Diaz. Now, Manuel Diaz was going to lead them to the boss. That boss is going to be Fausto Alcorón. Probably said that wrong because I don't speak Spanish well. Fausto Alcorón. So the goal is they're trying to find Fausto Alcorón.
Every day across that border, people are kidnapped or killed by his hand or with his blessing. To find them would be like discovering a vaccine.
And he is going to be the El Jefe. And what they learn through the interrogation and their intel gathering is that Falco uses a underground tunnel for a lot of the smuggling operations. Now, what's interesting is that this is based off real life, I would definitely say, because one of the most notorious drug lords, El Chapo, used a very advanced tunnel system that went from Mexico to the United States. Now, the real life tunnel system that El Chapo used was very intricate, unlike the tunnel system they found in New York. Do you hear Yiddish underneath my floor? Now, I do like the nod to real life here with the tunnels. And essentially what they need to do now is locate the tunnels and then find out where the lieutenant's at. So essentially their new plan is to disrupt the operation, and they want to take out the boss. So to do this, they need a plan. The plan's actually pretty good. Some good writing here. So what they do is they raid the money on Diaz's bank, which is in America. I believe it's in Phoenix. So they raid that bank.
Even if it's dog opening the account, I want you to freeze it.
Reggie and Kate, the FBI nerds, want to make a case out of it, but Matt's like, no, nerd.
Don't go in the bank, Kate.
There you go, and she's going in the bank.
And he's even like, don't go in the bank. Now, it's a smart reason why not to go in the bank. He's like, don't go into the bank because there's security cameras. And from those security cameras, the dirty cops can use that to find out what Kate knows and why they're disrupting the operation. More on that later. Now, their plan is disrupt the money. The money disruption is going to force Diaz to go back to his boss, Falco Astron. And from there, Matt's gonna let his bird dog loose. He's gonna let loose Alejandro Gillick. Now, I've been kind of postponing going over Alejandro Gillick. Alejandro Gillick is arguably what the movie is about, and he has presented us through the view of Kate Macer. Now, Alejandro Gillick's background is that he was an attorney, and I'm assuming he was one that would be prosecuting a lot of cartel guys, and that got his daughter melted and his wife beheaded. He is an excellent example of revenge. And it's interesting because I'm assuming this guy may have had maybe some sort of military or police background, but the CIA gets a hold of Alejandro and turns him into a force of nature. The guy turns out to be a freaking Terminator in the next movie. He is unstoppable. He is unrelenting. He does not quit. He does not waver. He is a freak of nature. What I find interesting about Alejandro is that he is a victim of the cartel, and I'm assuming every year there are thousands of victims of cartel violence. Now, typically these people may not have the means or the know-how or the resources to seek vengeance in this aspect, but Alejandro is given a unique gift. I'm assuming he was approached by Matt Graver of the CIA and turned into a lethal killing machine, an assassin, a Sicario. Roll credits. So he's turned into a literal assassin. And I love the idea of that, because if this was someone like me and I lost like my wife and my child to this, I would want vengeance. But it's like, what resources do I have? Would I just get myself killed off the bat? He is literally given vengeance and revenge on a golden platter here. And he has the agency and he has the competency to execute on it. The plan is raid the tunnel with the Delta Boys, cause a ruckus, cause a distraction, insert Alejandro as his bird dog, and he's gonna hunt down the boss man, Falcone Mussolini. Essentially, we're speed running through all this. Let's touch back on the bank scene. Now, Kate and Reggie go into the bank. This exposes Kate. To blow off some steam later, Reggie introduces Kate to Shane from The Walking Dead, and Shane, with his masculine charm, seduces Kate, who is probably down bad after being a single lady in the FBI. They just work differently. Kate and Shane go back to Kate's place. They get a little frisky. Kate then notices a band that matches the band that a lot of the money launderer scheme people were using. And she gets really unnerved and essentially gets up to break the whole thing off and grab her gun. Now, this is something that I think is really interesting to break down from like a legal standpoint and just like being in that situation. Imagine being with the girl, right? You're getting, like, I know it's a little like a hard concept for a lot of you nerds. But imagine being with a girl, you're getting intimate, you're getting frisky. All of a sudden she gets like really unnerved, gets up and then grabs her gun and essentially tries to shoot you. That would be going from the one extreme of the spectrum, right? Making love, making coitus, sweet, sweet love, to the other end of the spectrum, which is the extreme violence of lethal force, and essentially like all within 5 seconds. It's going 0 to 1,000. Like, that would be really hard to process if you're a dude like that. My honest thought is that he was just there to find out what she knew. I don't think that he had a plan to kill her. And then I think her introducing lethal force in the situation escalated up to where he started to choke her out. Like, when I first watched it, I thought he was there to kill her. Trying to shoot me, you fucking crazy! He's a Phoenix cop, right? I think him committing a murder like that's a bad idea. I think the plan was, hey, seduce her, find out what she knows. She introduces a handgun into the mix and it really kind of plays his hand, right? But thankfully, like, she's getting the daylights choked out of her, but Alejandro Gillick shows up and beats the snot out of the guy, and they find out what he's attached to, and he's like essentially screwed, right? He's a dirty cop. That's not gonna go well for him. Okay, so we cover that. I really wanted to talk about that because I was thinking about it. I was like, dude, imagine that scenario. That would be wild, especially for all parties involved, right? Like, that would not be fun. Like, I feel bad for Kate, and I also, in a weird way, feel bad for Shane from The Walking Dead. Also, I love that actor. He's a great actor. What is this channel? No, I'm just kidding. I love this stuff. Now, we get the tunnel raid scene. So everything is falling into motion. The tunnel raid scene is another example of bad Delta gear, and just bad gear in general. And I hate the gear that Matt wears. I hate the gear that Steve wears. I hate the gear that Alejandro wears. the gear across the board, terrible. Nonetheless, Delta Boys still looking like a militia airsoft team, not rocking like Panos or dual tubes, rocking PVS 14s. They roll into the tunnel, no suppressors, weird kid again, but they of course are mobbing and mogging and cleaning house. They insert Alejandro, and he catches one of the dirty Mexican cops in the process of the drug smuggling through his patrol car. And as soon as he pretty much grabs that guy, Kate shows up, and Kate's like, what are you doing? Stop. Like, what are we doing here? And he's like, there are things in motion that you are not stopping, FBI nerd lady. Shoots her in the vest, and he's like, if you ever point a gun at me again, I'll kill you. Pretty much like that vibe. So then she's like, oh my God. And so she goes back in the tunnel on the other side of America, where like her and Reggie link back up, and the Delta Boys are like, hey, get with the program and quit being such nerds. Like, we are here to stop evil, which I kind of like that vibe. And the nerds, the FBI nerds are like, we want to build a case, and it's like, you guys are really like through and through pure government bureaucrats, because you're trying to make this thing that is awesome that they're doing, like the CIA doing good for once by fighting a very evil organization. And the CIA technically could arguably be like an evil organization. Different topic, different video, maybe in the future. I don't want to get the CIA Journalist Award, so we'll maybe not avoid that. But essentially, they want to be like through and through government bureaucrats, and they want to build a case throughout this entire thing. And like even Kate threatens to go public, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But then we get to Alejandro tracking down the lieutenant with the patrol car. He's like telling the cop, hey, force the guy out. Guy gets out. He has an FN57, forces Diaz to drop it, and then he smokes the cop and then shoots Diaz in the leg, forces him to drive up to the cartel house, where he, of course, is full assassin mode, cleaning house. And then we get to the boss, Macloni Falcone. So he is having dinner with his family. And this is a pretty heavy scene because he has his two young boys and his wife there. And in that scene, he smokes the three of them first, leaving him alive to witness the horrors. And this was a scene that I really thought, like going back in the vein of being in Alejandro's shoes, would I have the stones to cold-bloodedly murder two children and his wife? Like that one, honestly, I don't think I have that in me. Like I would want the guy that was responsible for my family's death, but killing his family too? Oh my God, that is brutal. Now there is the argument of like the baby Hitler thing, where if you go back in time, would you kill baby Hitler? Like you're killing an innocent baby. Alcrone's kids are probably gonna grow up to be in the business, and they're probably gonna grow up to be some gnarly bad guys. So technically they're probably on the wrong path already. His wife, I don't know, you never know. Women are sometimes very Machiavellian and also involved in the politics, so she may not be innocent, so I can maybe see that, but that's still a very cold-blooded move. Like it's really hard for me to justify, and maybe I just don't have the stomach to be a CIA assassin, so maybe that's why they haven't recruited me yet, but it's really like, that one's dark. That one's a dark move, and it kind of shows this moral gray area where you have a guy who is so bent on revenge. I think he's even losing his own morality in a quest for vengeance, and that's kind of like a good message of the movie is like, how much is this revenge going to cost you? Because everything has a price. So Kate gets back from the raid, probably a few days later or weeks go by. Alejandro shows up at Kate's place and like, hey, this is a gag order. You better not talk or else you're going to get yourself unalived by your own hand. And it's essentially what's hinted at in that scene. And Kate is just not settling right with it. She does something that Alejandro warned her not to do.
Don't ever point a weapon at me again.
And that is, she goes on her balcony as Alejandro's walking away and points a gun at her. And it really, like, I do love that scene because it's very powerful because she's still trying to hold on to some last grip of control over the situation. And she never had a grip on the situation the entire time. Like, she never had control. She never had agency over herself. She was just a pawn in a bigger game being played, in a game of wolves. And Alejandro knows this. Like, he's just like, all right, I'm ditching out from this girl. Like, she's just full retard. And that's essentially the end of Sicario 1. Fantastic movie. All right, biggest critique, of course, was the bad gear, but I can suspend that in the name of a great plot, great writing, and great acting. Now, we get to Sicario 2. Now, Sicario 2 was not directed by Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve, if you're not aware, gave us Dune, gave us Blade Runner, and we love those movies. So, getting to the second one, we kind of lose a little bit of the aesthetic and the vibe that we kind of knew in the first one. The second one was still good, but to me it wasn't as great as the first one. And sometimes that's a common theme in Hollywood, when the follow-ups just aren't the best. So then we get to the second movie, which came out in 2018. So it was a few years later, and I think maybe some of the hype train died off, but it was still a pretty good movie. I, of course, went and watched it in theaters, and that one really a little bit more interesting because it's crazy is that it kind of seems way more relevant to today, 6 years later, about what's going on at our border now. Because the start of the movie is essentially immigrants crossing the border, and then amongst that crowd, there is a jihadist, a man on a holy war mission, and he essentially detonates himself, and they find more prayer rugs, hinting that there could be more guys that have infiltrated. Which then, the next scene in Kansas, and you have some extremists going into a store, and then they clack off S-vests. So they tie this all back to the cartel, which facilitated the smuggling. And so they had to find out who let these guys get through because they believe they were Yemeni. Now they go to Somalia, and this is where the movie really stepped up its game in that sense, because they have these high-speed operators do like a halo jump into Somalia, grab a guy, and those guys all look like they got their kit squared away. They grab a guy, a Somalian guy that does pirating operations, bring him back to a compound, I think in Djibouti, Sheikh your Djibouti, and then essentially they're like drone striking his family.
Is that your brother?
Until he gets the info. And this is where we get Matt Graver again. This time Matt Graver's got a sick freaking beard, he's rocking Crocs, and he's got access to, you know, guys on standby with drones.
I'm gonna call in an airstrike on your house.
It's another vibe. Honestly, it's a vibe of like the U.S. military powers, at times pretty impressive. So it's kind of like a sick vibe in that aspect. So he gets the intel, like, who paid you off to let this shit by? And they tie it back to the cartels. And that essentially lets Matt Graver off the leash with the DC bureaucrats, because the president wants to get to the bottom of this. Now,
how would you define terrorism, Mr. Graver? The administration believes that the drug cartels now fit that definition.
In real life, I believe Donald Trump classified the cartels as a terrorist organization, or wanted to.
If you try to kill our citizens, we will kill you. We will kill you.
So it kind of like there's some real life tones going on within the movie. And the DC bureaucrats wanting to take the fight to the cartel is like a really interesting example. So to do this, they essentially kidnap the daughter of one of the top cartel guys, and they make it seem like a rival cartel did it. This is gonna shake the nest. Now it's not coming from the US government, it's coming from a rival cartel faction. We're gonna speed run through the second movie because I don't like it as much as the first movie. But this is where the movie, we get to see a little bit more of Alejandro's character arc change, where he was a guy that was hell-bent on revenge, willing to kill an innocent family, I guess semi-innocent family, in the name of vengeance, to show the boss man Falcone what it's like to lose your family. Time to meet God.
Adios.
Now in the second movie, we do get Adios. Adios is pretty sick. One of like the defense attorneys for the cartel gets smoked with a Beretta, and Alejandro's like, adios. It's actually pretty good. So this is an interesting little bit. So they're essentially taking the fight to the cartel again, and thankfully they ditch Kate. They ditch Kate completely, and now it's just an Alejandro, Matt, and Steve forcing story. The boys are back, and they don't know how back they are. And it's essentially a story about Alejandro Gillick in this one again. And it's more so, the side story is the life cycle of what's going on with the cartel, because you have a young kid as a subplot in this movie that gets caught up and starts working for the cartel. Now this is important because it ties back to Alejandro being a Terminator, because this kid would try and execute Alejandro in the later half of the movie, but Alejandro still lives. Now they kidnap the daughter of one of the top cartel guys, and she manages to escape during a raid gone bad where the Mexican federales and cartel guys ambush the Americans in Mexico. And this is a PR nightmare. Whew. From a political standpoint, there are a lot of Mexican Americans here. They can tie their lineage back to Mexico, and they have family in Mexico as it is. So American spooks smoking a bunch of Mexican federales in Mexico looks really bad, no matter how dirty they are. And the company they were using is a private military company. They're not just like CIA spook Americans, like that's kind of Matt Graver's operation, but Matt Graver hires, I'm assuming, what would be an old military buddy and his private military corporation to help him out. He essentially has a massive budget and hires this guy for all the resources they need, because the US doesn't want this to trace back to them. So they're using PMCs to essentially execute a lot of what's going on here. And PMCs, we've talked about in prior videos, or mercenaries, kind of a vibe, okay? I think it's kind of a sick vibe, especially in the modern era. So to do this, they need those guys. And those guys all get ambushed in Mexico. Now, after this ambush, there's an interesting scene that happens, and it's the Secretary of Defense talking to Matt Graver, and he asks, hey, what went wrong or what's happening? Like essentially that vibe. And Steve Forsing chirps up and tells him what went wrong exactly to the T.
We don't have the infrastructure for that, sir. Mission security would be almost impossible.
But the Secretary of Defense or the DC bureaucrats like, I want to hear it from Max Graver, right? You're not in charge, shut up is the vibe.
We don't have the infrastructure for that, sir.
And it's really interesting because like in that world, it is very political. Like these guys just operate on that wavelength. But I do love one thing about Matt's character is that he sticks up for his guy. He sticks up for Steve and he just parrots the same thing that Steve said exactly right back to the bureaucrat. It's like a very clever, subtle FU back to him. I don't know, I really love that scene. But essentially the other DC bureaucrat, the lady's like, hey, you better clean house.
When I say clean, gentlemen, I mean spotless.
Like this better be spotless and it can't trace back to us. So we sped run that movie pretty quick, but an important detail is that, yeah, the girl escapes in the convoy. Alejandro goes after her and essentially he kind of has a change of heart. Instead of making her disappear the Alejandro way, he's like, I'm gonna look after her. And I think the reason he wants to look after her is that even in the movie they mention it, but it's like she reminds him of his daughter. And it's kind of like, okay, you start to see a lack of the moral ambiguity and he's kind of like this guy, like he's still a dad at the end of the day. And he forgoes his CIA assassin methods to look after this girl who, she is a daughter of a head of a Mexican cartel, which she knows what's going on, right? She knows daddy's got a lot of money. She's in a very high-end private school. She has her own house to herself, like a mansion to herself. Even Steve was like, saw the mansion, was like, I wish I was a teenage girl.
Teenage girl with her own 30-room mansion. I wish I was a teenage girl.
Like it's a sick house, right? So she's aware of like who daddy is and she knows, right? She's not innocent of the whole thing. She's essentially like the princess to the kingdom. She's an untouchable. And Alejandro has a change of heart and is like, all right, I want to get her back to America so she can be in a safer space and doesn't get deleted off the planet. And Alejandro just buries his UMP-45 in the dirt. And it's like, as a gun guy, it's really weird to think about, just like, don't need you anymore, and buries you. Like it just kind of breaks my heart and I'd be so stoked to dig up like a sick UMP-45 like that. It's like a random detail, but I was watching it, I was like, dude, how sick, how freaking stoked, how gassed out of my mind would I be to dig up a UMP in my backyard or on my property? Like, ooh, that would be sick. I couldn't imagine. I could not imagine or fathom burying one of my favorite guns. And it's really interesting too, because Alejandro's like a big SMG guy throughout both movies. He chooses the MP5 and 9mm, and then he goes in the next movie for 45 ACP on the UMP-45. Random tidbit. So what they do is they go to the border crossing and try and cross over, but he gets found out by one of the kids that saw him originally in Mexico. And from there, they take him, ambush him, take him out to the desert, and try and execute him. And he gets shot through the cheek, but he essentially lives and goes on another mission back to the States. While all this is happening, Matt Graver and Steve Forsing hop into Blackhawk for the PMCs. They intercept the cars they think that have the girl, and they absolutely kill everybody involved, right? They take the girl, and then Matt also has a change of heart. He doesn't kill her, but they bring her back to put her into protective custody. We kind of do see also Matt kind of on the same wavelength as Alejandro there. And Alejandro comes back and manages to escape, and it's pretty sick. Like he finds frag grenades in the truck he's in, and he uses it on one of the other cartel cars. Like it's a pretty sick vibe where he's like just all shot up and manages to get back. Like it's pretty cool. That pretty much closes out Sicario 2. At the very end, we get Alejandro catching the guy that shot him, and he hints at like, hey, so you want to be a Sicario? And it's kind of setting up the third movie. So there's been a hint at a third movie, and I think writer strikes and just, I don't know, maybe Hollywood politics have slowed it down, but ultimately I would be excited for a third movie. I'm not sure where they're gonna go with it, but with this pacing and with the theme of Sicario, I think there's potential. Maybe they didn't think the first movie was gonna be as successful as it was, and it really took off, and they were like, all right, let's do another one. The second movie wasn't as successful, but it was still good, and I'm really curious to see if a third movie could be on the same level as the first or second movie. So overall, pretty good franchise. So of course, what makes the movie so interesting are the characters, Alejandro, Steve, and Matt. I think I really enjoyed their characters. I enjoy the backstories they have. Matt arguably is the least interesting of the backstories, with him being a CIA spook. I'm assuming he had a prior military background, but from everything I Googled and researched on him, I couldn't find much. I'm assuming it was the pipeline of he was a high-speed soldier, and then maybe his soldiering time came to a close, and the CIA picked him up, and he turned into a high-ranking CIA officer, worked with Steve to some capacity back in their military days. When Steve was done with his soldiering, he picked up Steve, who still wanted to do high-speed cool guy stuff, and they were like kind of good pals because they have a really good relationship throughout the movie with how they jive together.
When I pee, it burns. Maybe it's gonorrhea.
And then Alejandro came across Matt's radar and at some point approached him and brought him into the fold and trained him into an assassin. Now, Steve and Matt, as cool as their background is and potential with spin-offs and like their own shows, I think Steve definitely for sure has potential to have his own show, which I would definitely watch the Steve Forsting show. And of course, Alejandro is the most interesting character of the franchise. It's kind of like his story. His story being the defense attorney or the prosecutor brutally lost his family, and that's his why, is revenge. And I think for a lot of us, for you and me, we identify with that if you lost your family, you would want to seek revenge. But the question is, how far would you go for revenge? I am locked in. I am edging. I have left my goon cave. I have paid the phantom tax in Ohio. Kyson Tat has nothing on me. I will riz up baby Gronk better than Livy Dunn ever could. Skibbity toilet. Now you may unsubscribe.